Hello everyone, welcome to today's Novedge webinar, Integrating Real-Time Visualization MBR in Design with Enscape. With the advent of real-time rendering, we have an opportunity to integrate our visual exploration directly into our design process, allowing designers to instantly assess the impact of their design decision as they iterate and refine. Today, learn the advantages of integrating visualization into your design using Enscape. Let me tell you a little bit about our today's presenter. Petr Mitev is the head of AEC Technology at Enscape, with a background in both architecture and web and software development. He joins Enscape from NBBJ, a global architecture planning and design firm, where he was head of design computation. And outside of work, Petr enjoys the outdoors, hiking, kayaking, traveling, and also is an amateur photographer. Cool. And now let me tell you a little bit about Novedge. Novedge is changing the way designers purchase 3D software, offering more choices, more freedom, best advice, and faster service. Check us out at novedge.com, where you can find the latest version of Enscape. And now, enough about me and Novedge, and let me share Petr's screen so it can tell you all about Enscape. Okay, we can see your screen. Petr, take it away.
All right. And can you just confirm that the slides are the ones that are being shown?
Yep.
Great. All right, let's get going. So yeah, like we were just talking in the introduction, we're going to explore how we can integrate visualization directly into our design process. And I think for those of you that are architects or designers, you might even be asking, well, isn't it already? You know, is this not what we're already doing? So maybe we'll unpack that question as well. But just to kind of give a quick overview of the topic, so I'll do a quick introduction about Enscape, a little bit about me, and then I want to just kind of try and unpack the question of why do we visualize in the first place? You know, what exactly is the purpose of doing that work, and specifically to the design process. And the next bullet point maybe even kind of already answers the question, but then we're going to look at what the design process looks like today. For AEC, we're going to look at what the challenges are, and we're going to just kind of examine how they impact our process and then the work that we ultimately deliver. And then I think we're going to just wrap it up with really diving into those opportunities coming from challenges, and we're just kind of extrapolate what that means even going forward, you know, based on where we are today. What do we see as the future? All right, so let's get going. A little bit of introduction first, just to add a little bit more detail. I think Barbara covered it pretty well, but my name is Petr. I'm the head of AEC Technology here. My contact info is there if anybody has any questions after this webinar, or if you just want to yell at me because you don't agree with something that I present, feel free to reach out though. Seriously, it's a pretty big topic, and I want to make sure everybody gets the support they need, even if we don't have time or capacity here at this webinar. But I studied as an architect, trained as an architect, and even started working as an architect at Kieran Timberlake before I began pivoting into software and technology. And really the reason for me to do that was because I really wanted to make a bigger positive impact on the industry, and I thought that technology is one of the best ways to do that. And it's actually why I'm currently at Enscape. So let's talk a little bit about Enscape. I as a longtime user of Enscape, I feel like everybody knows us and they're familiar, but as I've been with the company now for a little bit of time, I'm starting to understand that might not be the case. And there's actually a lot of designers, architects, and other AEC practitioners that don't really know what we're all about. And for me, the quote that you see here is probably the best way to just kind of sum up our vision and our mission in a nutshell. So Enscape empowers and inspires the community, the AEC community, by helping architects and designers to understand their decisions, validate their questions, and communicate their ideas. And our mission is to deliver accessible, everyday tools to transform building design into immersive and engaging real-time experiences. So that's kind of a mouthful, but you know, if I really try to distill it and get right to the core, for me, it's all about this. You know, number one, it has to be accessible, and number two, it has to speak to the building design process. I think as you look across the industry, I'm sure that everybody on the webinar right now is probably from a different type of organization, different scale, and you're all facing very, very different challenges. And so are your coworkers, so are your other peers in the industry. So for me, that accessibility thing is absolutely crucial, because if we don't reach everyone or most everyone in the industry, then we're not really making an impact. And as everybody knows, AEC is a very collaborative space. You know, there's not one team or one person that kind of puts the work on their back and carries it to the finish line. It really takes a village to really bring the concept to fruition and to maturity, and of course the concept being rooted in building design. So, all right, let's take a look at this question. Why do we visualize? And like I said, we probably even already answered it a little bit, but for me, it's to support design. And again, this is AEC, so we're really looking at architectural design. The reason why we even want to create the image that we're seeing right now on the right side is because there is a building challenge to solve. And building, I'm using here a little bit generally, right? Maybe a better word might be environment, built environment. But at the end of the day, we're asking questions of our designs, and these questions are maybe aesthetic in nature, maybe experiential, but I think for me, it's really important to remember that the built environment is really at the core of why we do this kind of work. And if that doesn't sound particularly inspiring or interesting, I would offer one other way of looking at it. And one thing I learned actually too recently is that, you know, the average person spends the vast majority of their time indoors. And yeah, okay, you might say, you know what, that's pretty obvious. But it's very interesting just how high it is. And here we can see that the EPA is projecting that the average American spends 87% of their life indoors. And that's not counting cars. If you add cars, then all of a sudden we're close to like 95%. But the point is that buildings are a critical part of our life, of our experience. And if we can make a positive impact to building design, then we are making a positive impact to the environment that we all share. And for me, that's a really, really powerful thing. I mean, and it's something that I think resonates, even if you're not an architect, even if you're not a designer. Obviously, for us, it's something that we love to do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this field. But yeah, it's crazy for me to think just how many people it impacts, whether they know it or not. So for me, when we think about empowering design, it comes back to this. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we kind of go forward. Another thing that I want to highlight with this process is that there's a very wide kind of range of roles in people that support the visualization process. And it's probably way too difficult to quantify each and every role, but I want to start by looking at the polar sides of this kind of spectrum. So on one side, let's call it the left side, we've got our pure architects. Now, these are people that are educated, trained, experienced in designing buildings, so that they're safe, so that they're adequate, so that they really improve people's lives. And these are people that may not be so well versed in other technologies like visualization. So that if we jump to the other end of the spectrum, we see people that are really focused on computer graphics. These are visualization specialists. And again, there's a lot of different titles for this role, but let's again, just for this exercise, imagine that this person is the opposite, meaning that they don't really know anything about building design or construction, building codes, whatever. But what they really know is how to create an impactful visual 3D experience. And like I said, really, these polar opposites probably don't exist in too many firms. I think most of us would find ourselves kind of somewhere in the middle of this wide range. So when we think about, again, accessible, that word that I highlighted earlier, I really think it's important to just think about how many different kinds of people this has to impact in order for it to truly be accessible. It needs to impact people that know design, but not computer graphics, and it vice versa. It needs to impact people that are very well versed in computer graphics, but not so versed in design, and everybody in the middle. And that's a very, very broad range of people, but again, it's who we have in this industry. It's a very diverse, multidisciplinary, collaborative industry, and we have to support the reality of the roles and the challenges that they're facing. So, okay, if we visualize in order to support design, let's look at the AEC design process. Surely there are things we can improve, and surely things that we can latch onto that are already good that we can make even better. So, what is design? It's, for better or for worse, for me, it's definitely not a linear process. And we are going from point A to point B, but I think everybody that's designed a building or a landscape or an urban environment knows that it's not just a straight shot. There's a lot of different things that have to be explored in order to get to point B from point A. So for me, it starts looking a little bit maybe like this, where you've got your main design, but you're also branching these different streams in order to answer different questions, different parts of the design, different layers of detail that you need to add. So just as an example, let's look at some examples of these processes. So obviously visualization is one of them. That's what we're talking about today. I also added here energy modeling because I think it's really indicative of again, this type of workflow. And there's others we can throw in here, like pedestrian simulation, like sun and shade studies, what have you. The point is that these are all things that need to happen to support design, but more often than not, they happen as these separate processes, separate threads, which then somehow all have to get merged back together and inform the main design, which is then going to be documented and, of course, built. So what ends up happening is, this really is split. We need visualization to support our design process, but it's also a separate process. And for most of us, it's a process that's really not carried out by the same people that are designing. We might outsource to a professional graphics company, or we might have a separate team in-house that is really tasked with rendering. And again, though, if we think back to that gradient, there's probably hybrid roles as well. But for the most part, this process is really, really isolated and disconnected, which really makes it into kind of a fractured design process. So what ends up happening is, or at least one of the things that ends up happening is, when we need to do something like a rendering or a visualization, we end up stopping or pausing design. We say, okay, we're going to take a model, we're going to turn it into something else so that we can render it, or so that we can do energy modeling, whatever. And then when we're done with that, we're going to wrap the lessons that we learned back into our main design stream, and we're going to keep going. Now, already we can probably see how this is creating some inefficiencies or some problems. But as we kind of go along, we're going to see how it not only impacts kind of the quantitative side, but really the qualitative side of your design. So these, for me, are really the two main models right now that I see carried out by most practitioners. The first one at the top here is this pause or the stop that we saw earlier, and the bottom one is a fork, which basically means that the kind of the main design stream still keeps going, but there's also the separate stream for visualization or for rendering. So they're both kind of going in parallel, sometimes answering the same questions, sometimes answering different questions, and again, at the end, they somehow have to come together. So that merge is quite difficult, and unfortunately we don't really realize the problems with the merge until we actually have to do it, until we really have the task of saying, okay, we've got this design model and we have this visualization specific thing, now they need to come together. And there's a challenge of design reconciliation. If our mainstream hadn't stopped, if it was the pause model, then there's a little bit less of a merge. But nevertheless, if that had happened, then we're kind of missing out on the time that we could have been designing and the time that we dedicated instead to rendering or to visualizing. And it inevitably leads to a loss of information. Even in a diligent merge, moves are going to be missed. You're not going to pick up every single wall that changed material. You're not going to pick up every single piece of furniture that changed or moved or what have you. And because of that, a lot of things simply aren't going to make it back into the design model. So you've done this exploration for a visual or an aesthetic purpose, but you're only taking maybe 70, 80% of it back into the main design model. So you're kind of already creating a loss for yourself. And the easiest way to quantify this is, with the time that it takes to reconcile these decisions and account for those missed decisions. And I mean, the number looks different, I think, for everyone, based on the practice, based on the project scale, based on the stage of design, what have you. It looks very different, but the formula is the same. And it's tough to kind of, I guess, pinpoint per se, but it's definitely something that you should be aware of. And it's something that if you were to carry out this exercise through this lens, you could definitely put some real numbers in terms of hours, and then kind of understand the opportunity cost that this kind of process costs you. And the interesting thing is, there's also a qualitative side to this, right? I mean, we're talking about design. This isn't a bank balance sheet. So the kind of the people hours and the cost and the time don't tell the whole story. In addition to the impact on design, we have to consider the impact to the process. And by taking the split approach, we inherently commit to designing in a vacuum. In the split model, these different decisions are always happening in isolation. They're not informed by what's happening in the parallel model. Even if both of these models are being managed by the same team, there will always be this kind of disconnect through the separation of information and medium. And because of these constraints, one model is always going to lag in terms of development, or maybe even be abandoned altogether, only to be recreated later on. And you know, again, a lot of us on this call, I mean, how many times have you seen this happen? You're sprinting towards a major milestone, you create a separate model for a rendering. Okay, after the milestone, you throw that model away, and then next milestone, you have to recreate the model again, because you've made progress on your design, and now you have another milestone. And this kind of like always throwing it out and starting from scratch, that's exactly the quantitative side. And of course, the qualitative side is, yeah, you're missing things, you're missing information, and you're making decisions in a vacuum. While you're maybe changing your window sizing in your design model, the visual exploration might be finding that there's a problem with glare. And you have no way of knowing that, of course, because you're not experimenting with light, you're not experimenting with materials, you're just maybe making the plan compliant, or maybe working on a constructability question, and you really have no way of knowing unless that other team that's exploring the visual questions is right next to you, and you've got a perfect channel of communication, which is much easier said than done. Right. So with real-time rendering, we have an opportunity to solve these problems. Instead of continuing this kind of split approach, we can bring everything together. We can put it all in the same stream. We can really integrate our visual exploration right into the design process. So it's not a separate thread, but it actually is a part of the design process. And that allows us to really instantly assess the impact of our decisions as we continue to iterate and refine, and we don't take on the risk of losing time or losing assets, what have you. We're not limiting ourselves to just doing this at certain milestones. We can do it all the time, and there's really no limit to how frequently we can do it and what kinds of questions we can ask. My slides here are not cooperating slightly. There we go. And this not only improves our process by fostering that informed decision making, but it also adds to the value of our design assets by building up intelligence and information in one centralized point of truth model. Again, if we're not throwing away these rendering models at every milestone, instead what we're doing is building up design intelligence in one central point. And I mean, really, that was kind of the promise of BIM from the get-go. So for me, we're really working in line with the goal of the BIM process, and the kind of the train of thought that the industry has been following for quite some time. And you know, for me, going back to architecture schooling, the one thing that always stood out to me, even back then, was that, you know, a common thread was to always look beyond the plan. And for the architects on this call, I'm sure you've heard that, and it probably means something slightly different to everybody. But for me, the concept here at the core is really to try and understand a design decision holistically. You know, you're not just looking at this through one's lens, you're looking at it through a number of different lenses. That might be a plan, a section, a perspective, what have you. But you're really trying to holistically understand the impact that your moves are making on the entire design, not just kind of an isolated view. And for this, I mean, I think Enscape is almost exactly perfect for this. And if Enscape had existed back when I was in school, I probably would have heard think beyond the plan a lot less. There were certainly things around back then that could help us get there. I mean, even in the earliest stages of BIM, that was kind of the foundational point, right? In the first Revit, you could move one element, and all of a sudden it would be reflected in all kinds of views. So you could really interrogate it a lot more intently without having to spend time on representing it. You could completely eliminate representation out of your workflow and really sink that time into perfecting the design. And that's a powerful thing. And I think it's something that we can make even better with real-time rendering, because if we do that, we're creating value for ourselves and for our clients in the form of process efficiency and higher quality work and deliverables when we think about the end product and the constructed thing. So yeah, with real-time rendering, I think that process only gets better, because Revit, other BIM platforms, by default, they give us this view on the left, which is great. You know, we've got a spatial understanding of what's happening, but we as humans need a lot more information to be able to relate to this. And you know, it might be great for an architect that has a lot of experience, a lot of training, but most people that we engage with as stakeholders in the AEC design process, they don't necessarily have the same background as we do. So visualizing this extra layer of detail is something that we really need to help them with, and sometimes even help ourselves with. And for me, it's a powerful thing. I mean, just looking at an image like this, and you know, I don't know, I put my architect hat on and just kind of ask myself, what questions can I not answer with the image on the left that I can answer with the image on the right? And it's a lot, right? I mean, you look at the image on the right, you all of a sudden have information on light, materials, the view, this kind of background, mountains, whatever, the kind of the context. You're adding in a layer to the architecture and the design process, which is absolutely critical. I mean, nobody would just design with this view to the left, right? There's so much missing that is absolutely going to impact everything from budget to experience to time. It's going to percolate entirely down the design and construction process. So the more of that you can understand up front, the more power you're going to have as you get closer and closer to the delivery of that project, whether that's construction or whether that's just a handoff of the documents. So let's look at a more concrete example of what we're talking about here. So one example that I really like to use is this kind of flow of design decisions. So maybe we start at the facade. Maybe we change the size of our windows, or we change the material of the windows, whatever. We make an impact to the facade. And the next logical question for me to ask as a designer is, okay, well, how does that impact the light coming into the space? Is it more light, less light? Do we have an incident of glare, or maybe quite the opposite? And if so, let's respond to that, right? And one of the easiest, or I guess most impactful ways to respond to something like glare or lack of light is to change the materials. Maybe the material of the floor, maybe the material of the wall. Again, if you have glare, you might pick a material which is lower in terms of reflectance. Vice versa, if you're in a low light environment, you might paint your walls white and really maximize the light bounce in there. And finally, if that's not enough, you might then ask the question, well, what kind of electrical fixtures do I need to put in to really make these light levels adequate for the human experience of the space? And you can kind of imagine this chain of inquiry happening on a lot of different design elements, right? Because these things are related. You can't just change the windows without the implication that is going to have on your materials, on your construction, on your facade assembly. There's questions of performance, of experience that you absolutely need to answer. Again, it's not just a one view. You're not just looking at it through one lens. You have to look at it through every lens that you can as a designer. And this kind of string of questioning and decision-making really isn't possible in a split or forked design environment. These discrete decisions really must happen together for an informed decision. And just like we saw earlier, it's not only an impact on the process, but also on the deliverable and the design artifact itself. If this process were carried out in one of our split or forked environments, we would be left with an absolute slew of questions to answer afterwards. So let's take a look at that as an example as well. Let's pretend that we're trying to explore the same thread of questioning, but we're doing it in our traditional ArcViz process, where we're basically exporting models or kind of stopping design in order to answer these questions. So if we were to do it that way, let's think of some questions. For example, where does the light location exist, right? I mean, they were modeled in the visualization model for the renderings, but how will they be documented in the design model? And what about the manufacturer data? We showed the client a certain aesthetic, but now we've got to figure out a way to translate that into documentation and vendor specs. Or going back to this materiality decision, how will those decisions about floor, wall materiality be carried over into the design model or the contract documents or the specifications? And what's the relationship between our render materials and the BIM data? Again, we've probably explored the visual side of things, but how are we going to take that back? It's so that it actually has an impact on the built thing, on the actual design. We've made these decisions that influence the appearance of the project, but if we don't document them, if we don't capture them in our design model, they're never going to have an impact on our clients, on the built environment, or anybody else for that matter. They're really just going to be an artifact of a process which didn't create anything. So overall, this kind of traditional process leaves us with a lot more questions and more work after a design exploration. It doesn't really empower teams as much as it can because of the constraints of the workflow. I mean, it's really not a design process. It's a production process. And it's often thrown into design with a lot of limited benefits because, I mean, the goals of design and the goals of production are really, really different. If our design is completed, yeah, it makes sense to do a production process because our design isn't going to change. So all we're doing at that point is an exercise of representation. But if we're going to make changes to this, which is the nature of design and design iteration, then it doesn't really make sense to throw in a production process because your design is just going to change. And then you're either going to have to redo the production process or just call it a day and say, you know what, that's the budget, that's the time that we had, and that's what we spent. So we can't ask this question again. So let's look at the example in one more view, and I'm going to try and play this video. I know it's going to be a little bit laggy for everybody due to the nature of playing videos over web calls, but I'll kind of talk over it, and hopefully at least the images that do come through might kind of explain. So we're really doing exactly what we talked about in that example right here. So we've got Revit open, and we've just changed the solid wall to a transparent curtain wall, and all of a sudden we can see how the lighting level is changing in the space. We can see what impact that has. It's obviously a lot more light, and so therefore now we're going to respond to that change with changing the material of our floor, and we've gone from this tile to this wood now, and we can see that the light is interacting with it in a completely different way. And now we can even change the time of day, right? Because we've explored this in the middle of the day, bright noon, that's awesome. But this space is going to be experienced at night as well. And again, with these kinds of things that we can do in real-time rendering without having to stop and do a separate process, we can interrogate this constantly. Every time we put something in, we can make these kinds of explorations and ask the same kinds of questions. And if the video is coming through at all, of course, you can see that it's being reflected live, right? There's no scene setup that you have to do. There's no rework, re-export. No, you're just designing as you always have. The only difference is that you've got instant feedback and the ability to change any number of parameters on the fly. Switch that. And it's also really worth highlighting, for me at least, that even though this is a real-time process, we're not really losing fidelity in terms of production level quality. Even though we're focusing on the design process, we don't have to give up any ground on quality. As the technology in the space continues to improve, like creating more powerful graphics processing hardware and improving software efficiency to take advantage of that hardware, real-time rendering is becoming more and more prevalent as a production tool as well as a design tool. And for me, one of the best ways of really seeing that is just looking at the work that our community has put together. Like right now, we're seeing a image from the Enscape forums from Sergio Fernando. And if the video isn't being compressed too much, hopefully you can see this with a lot of resolution. But it's for me, it's a beautiful level of visual fidelity. And if you were to take out the Enscape logo and the watermark for the forum user, and I asked you, hey, is this real-time rendering or is this good old-fashioned CPU ray tracing? I don't know that many people could answer that question. Outright. Or if I asked you, hey, is this made by a professional rendering studio, or did just some architect do it? Again, I think the nuances would be almost indistinguishable because of the level of quality we can pack in here. And yes, it's accessible for the average user. They certainly don't need to get this detailed. But if you are farther right on that user spectrum that we looked at the beginning of this slideshow, then you can certainly leverage the features and the power of Enscape to create something that's really believable and really immersive. Like right here, you can kind of see the detail on the rug, for example, the displacement map on the brick in the background. Same thing with the floor. It's just that added little bit of realism that takes this to the next level, and it's something that we can comfortably bring in front of clients, other stakeholders, for when we need a more kind of high fidelity and high quality thing. Let's take a look at one more video again. So apologies for the quality and the choppiness, but really this is taking a look at how we can layer on that information. We start with this white model, which I feel like every design starts with, where we're not being specific, we're not being detailed, but as time goes on and as we get more information about the design, we can add in more and more and more fidelity and resolution to the point where this is a really full-fledged immersive experience with materials, plants, environments that really speak and communicate to everyone, frankly. And the beauty is that, again, we don't need to start that way. We can make a very, very convincing and very powerful presentation without all of this detail. But that's the nature of design, right? We start rough and we get fine and we get more fine as time goes on, as we learn more things about the questions that we're answering. And Enscape lets us do just that. It works exactly in line with our design process. It can ramp up at the pace that we choose to ramp up, because that pace is different for everybody, right? I mean, working in hospitality, for example, or corporate commercial, I'm sure you know that turnaround is a lot quicker than if you were doing, let's say, a high-rise hospital, right? I mean, projects have very different schedules, very different timelines, and we really need a solution that works with our pace, and it doesn't set the pace for us. And because of that, I think Enscape is actually a perfect fit. So one more example here of another image from our community, another interior image, but again, for me, really just starting to speak to the level of quality we can get out of this if we really sink in a little bit more time. And a lot of this, really, we see a lot of exciting development in this space from our interior community, actually, which is great to see. Enscape works very well with interior lighting and with kind of the default setups that you might have in your project. So typically a scene like this, if you were doing something like V-Ray or another kind of static renderer, you'd have to put in a lot of time into getting this lighting to look correct. Not only the lighting as it impacts our perception of the space, but also as it plays with these different materials. And for example, right now, just in this shot, we can see a very high gloss tile on the bottom. We can see a much more matte kind of painted drywall on the right. And in the back, we've got these kind of rough textured curtains. And again, traditional rendering, you have to set all of this up. I mean, not just through materials, but also through lighting in order to get this kind of complex interaction to work together. And I won't even mention the effort that it takes to get that chandelier to reflect those images as accurately as it is that chandelier right in the middle. That's something that's a very unique feature of Enscape, and our ray tracing is very, very powerful. It runs on pretty much any hardware, so you don't need a $10,000 VR gaming rig. No, this is something that you can leverage with most AEC workstations, and this is quality that you don't have to fight tooth and nail to get. It's again going back to the point of accessibility. We want to make this quality accessible to designers. This shouldn't be something that you have to spend 50 grand on a professional rendering company to do this for you. This should be something that we can deliver to our clients or to our internal stakeholders whenever we want to. right? Because it's our design and we want to be able to explore it. Looking at an exterior shot as well, our assets are also another really, really great feature of Enscape, because they're not only performant, which is critical again of that accessibility, but they're very detailed. Our rendering team and our asset creation team are very meticulous, in particular, about how they create these assets. I was actually just talking to the head of our asset store, and he said, we've got a botanical almanac, and we're going page by page to understand how these plants are being built, or sorry, how the plants are actually built in real life, of course. And they're understanding everything from stem structure to leaves to how it all comes together. And it's not just an intellectual exercise for them. They're doing it because they want to provide that level of immersion and that level of realism to anyone and everyone. Again, because if you want to put together a scene like this and you ask one of your designers to model one of these trees, well, okay, they could do that for a week, sure, but would you rather have them doing that, or would you rather have them be exploring questions of actual building design? Would you rather have them look at code, material selection, all of that stuff, the things that we went to school for and the things that we love doing, right? I think most of us that trained as architects probably never had it in our minds that we're going to sit there and model trees for days. So again, that's something that we at Enscape want to address, and we want to acknowledge. We want to allow designers to design, and we want to let them do that in all kinds of medium and all kinds of scales. So of course, then this kind of raises the question, well, what about visualization professionals? Does this totally cut them out of the equation? And I would say absolutely not, because most firms, they definitely cannot afford to have visualization specialists. I mean, the average AEC firm worldwide is quite small, actually. The average firm is like something smaller than 5 people, actually. Again, when you pull in everybody, not just the big players. So it's not accessible to most firms, but even to the ones that it is accessible, I think it actually empowers those CG professionals, those visualizations professionals, because when you make this kind of technology accessible to the rest of their team, it doesn't render them useless, not at all. It actually allows them to focus on more complex problems and complex challenges, which maybe the designers and the architects can't solve themselves. So by kind of taking the bulk of this exploration work and putting it into the realm of design territory, you're actually enabling your visualization specialists to create more complex assets, or to ask more detailed questions. Maybe they can centralize intelligence into a material library, or really buckle down and try and understand what kind of lighting is most impactful to visual storytelling. So there's a lot of strategic questions and very important strategic questions that they can still work on. And this is absolutely not a replacement for the kind of work that they can provide. And if anything, we're actually seeing a lot of traction with Enscape in those kinds of companies or professionals as well, because this also enables them to design, and they don't design in the same way that we do, meaning that they're not recomposing space or building elements, but they're designing lighting, they're designing materials, and with this real-time feedback, that cranks their process up even more, because you don't have to pause, render. No, you're asking and you're seeing at the same time. And it impacts and improves their design process just like it improves ours as architects. So like I was saying too, this isn't a process, or the traditional visualization process isn't something that most firms can support by default, and that's something that we at Enscape want to challenge. A preparation for an Enscape scene takes no time at all. It takes no time at all because it's pulling exactly from your design environment, whether that's Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, anything. It's not this separate exported model. It doesn't take your machine offline for 30 minutes to get something out of it. No, it's happening right there in the core software in real time. And because of that, we see a much smaller need for people to do this work, and B, a smaller need for actual licenses or machines, processing power. And again, when we think of that average AEC firm and the capabilities that it has, this is essential. It's not just a nice to have that you can save money and time. It's a necessity, because I mean, yeah, they don't have the resources to support these kinds of dedicated departments or specialists, and we absolutely still want to enable them and empower them and let them be a part of the AEC community. So I think because of that, Enscape really starts to shine. That value that's realized in time and cost is huge. And without that value, we really wouldn't be seeing the massive adoption that we're seeing today. So looking to the future, where do we go from here? You know, rendering has been around for quite some time as a process. Well, rendering's been around since people could hold a pencil, but computer rendering has been around for shorter bit of time. And the next avenue that I think the world is looking to is cross reality. So cross reality, if you haven't heard the term, you probably have, but really it's just a catch-all for all the different realities that we have. You know, virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, whatever. Cross reality is something that's been gaining popularity, gaining adoption, but hasn't really quite reached critical mass. So the cool thing is that by reducing the time and cost of our visualization process with this real-time tech, we can also take advantage of these other powerful representation techniques in XR much more effectively. Because we don't need a separate thread of work to create a VR-ready model or XR-ready model, we can explore these decisions in VR a lot more often because we can afford to. And what this starts doing is really starting to take VR from an isolated workflow to a part of everyday design. And there's a lot of reasons why this tech is really exciting, but for me, the most notable is probably the potential to strengthen our relationships with our teams and our clients by making this kind of design communication really accessible. So the cool thing about VR is that it allows us to be immersed in a design space and really focus on experience. And that's something that might be a native ability to an architect or to a designer. But the reality is that most of the other stakeholders don't have that spatial thinking. They don't have that three-dimensional understanding. And we need to do everything that we can to give that to them. Because otherwise we're throwing these 2D images at them, whether they're drawings or whether they're renderings, and we're just kind of expecting that they're going to understand it in the same way that we do, but they won't, because they don't have the same background that we do. They haven't been thinking about geometry and space for their entire careers. So this accessibility is really critical to engaging as many stakeholders as possible, and even building consensus around a design decision. It's a powerful process. And there's also another really interesting part. By reaching and engaging more stakeholders in a conversation, we also allow our project to be informed by a more diverse set of voices and constraints. And through that, it becomes more informed and more mature, a more complete culmination of that intelligence of the designer, the client, and the community at large. And I think those of you that have worked on larger projects can probably definitely relate to it. Yes, it's very tough the bigger the crowd is, but the more successful you are at merging all those voices into one cohesive design, I mean, the better your project's going to be. And when we kind of think of our favorite projects, or at least when I think of my favorite projects in the history of time, the best ones are exactly those. They're the ones that responded to as many stakeholders as possible, the communities, groups, and people that have a real stake in making this happen. Now, the one challenge that we have with this, I think, is the hardware and the software costs. I think a lot of you can relate to the fact that VR is expensive, right? I mean, this headset costs money. You need a very powerful machine to run VR without any kind of stuttering or lag. So again, because of that, it really pushes out a lot of the average AEC firms, and that's not cool. I mean, that's not what we're about at Enscape. We're about accessibility and inclusivity. So unfortunately, we don't have any kind of impact on the people that make the headsets, but we can certainly do a lot with our software to make it as efficient as possible. And that's something that our rendering team is working on day in and day out, because they know that we're not all sitting here at home with $10,000 gaming computers and ready to work. They know the realities of our workstations, and they know that if our VR can't run on your computers, then it's never going to reach your teams, it's never going to reach your clients, and then all it's reduced to is a bag of buzzwords. So that's really our challenge. Our challenge is to make our software as efficient as possible so that you can get this experience. And like I alluded to, no, we don't have a direct impact on our hardware partners, but we certainly keep a very, very close relationship with all of them. And we try to stay on top of the latest advancements that they're doing, the latest advancements that are coming down the pipeline, because we might not be able to do it today, but it is definitely our goal that this is going to be something that is accessible to everyone, and cost is not going to be a prohibitive thing. And I also think it's really interesting to look at the other avenues of exploration that cross reality allows us to spin up. So we can highlight other pieces of design intelligence as well. In addition to exploring the immersive space, we can layer on information from or analysis from the design directly onto the experience. For example, we can expose wall finish data while coordinating with our interiors team. We could layer on spatial daylight autonomy information when coordinating with sustainability consultants. Or maybe we could even expose construction costs and really just allow the client and the team to quantify the impacts of design decisions as they're making them, rather than relying on a long feedback loop, which inevitably ends in a value engineering exercise. And from our central design model, there's really no shortage of data available to interrogate, which is informative to the diverse questions posed throughout the stages of design. And what that really does is it begins to extend the value of our real-time or cross-reality workflow by serving more purposes than just representation. It begins to act as a central tool for crafting and presenting a design narrative. And what we're seeing on this image, at least, is the daylight feature of Enscape. Obviously, daylight is very, very critical to the rendering and to the representation, but we can also start quantifying that. And it's just one example of many different kinds of analysis that we can layer on. But again, it really speaks to this holistic understanding of a design question, right? As we change materials, as we change architecture elements, what does that mean for the other factors that are a part of our design? And again, the beauty of 3D or real-time 3D is that you can fluidly explore those and understand the relationships between them. So looking at another video here, this is really about that collaboration aspect, right? So VR is one great way of getting us all on the same page, but traditional design review is also no slouch, right? And the 2D image, the 2D experience is not going away anytime soon. We're absolutely not going to replace it, even if we tried. And at Enscape, we're building in features and functionality to support that. Design review looks very different office to office, and I'm sure it's also changing as these different vendors like Autodesk and other platforms are creating new solutions. But collaboration, communication is at the heart of everything, right? So one of the features that we're highlighting here is our collaboration feature. We can we can tag BIM assets, we can make comments, and we can create a consistent thread where our designers can really follow up on the feedback that they've received in a design review directly in the mode and the medium that they're actually going to have to make the decision. We don't have to open a PowerPoint on the side or a marked up Bluebeam and then also have Revit. No, it's all happening in the same environment. So in the design review, maybe we click this window and we make a comment, should be hidden, whatever. And then all we have to do is just jump right into Revit and fix it. And then jump right back into Enscape and see the implications of that. Again, just really thinking about that continuous stream. We don't want to continue fragmenting our users' workflow. The AEC software space is already so fragmented, and to really contribute to that, I don't think that would be very conducive to the design process, to your process. We want to enable it. We don't want to create offshoots and different things that you have to now stay on top of or manage and track. We want it to all be as centralized and accessible as possible. So coming to the end here, as we look forward to the future of the technology and the workflow it enables, we can also look forward to the increasing accessibility to our industry. As hardware and software costs continue to decline, we can expect this process to reach more and more practitioners worldwide. And that is a really great thing because it means we can all share in the benefits of a more connected design process and the impact it has on the built environment around us. We can also look forward to increased quality, taking that guesswork out of design and allowing us to ask questions in early stages which would not have been previously possible until post-construction. Overall, there's really a lot to be excited about in this real-time rendering space. The technology is going to continue to grow and empower designers and AEC practitioners globally. The value proposition is very strong, and the workflow is a really natural fit for the design process. I think with the creativity in our industry, we're only going to build up on that and make it even better. And we at Enscape are absolutely dedicated to that goal and to that mission, and we are continuously going to be tracking that space and trying to stay ahead of the curve as much as possible so that real-time rendering is more than just a technology, more than just a buzzword, and it's actually something that is going to create value in your design process, in your production process, and in your design and delivery of really everything and anything that you do in AEC. So with that, I am at my end. And I think we have some time for questions. So yeah, if anybody has anything that you would like to throw my way that I either covered or didn't cover, please go ahead and do that now. And I will yeah, watch the questions and see what we can get to.
Thank you, Peter. This was wonderful. And yeah, I urge everybody to type in your questions now. There's a question tab on the control panel. And Peter, you've been the perfect spokesperson for Enscape with all your experience on the field too. I mean, it's really hard to get a person who's also, you know, from the developing team, but also that has that knows the real use of the program. So thank you for today's presentation. It's been eye-opening, especially for me, since the first time that we host Enscape, and hopefully won't be the last on our webinars. I don't see any question. I think everybody's been mind blown as I've been. But just in case, we'll wait. Okay, we have one. I don't know if you can read it. I have a hardware question. I started using VR with Enscape. I found it out to be cause of a bit of dizziness, perhaps from looking around or refresh time. Any suggestions?
That is a really good question, and actually, it's fairly common. So I think there's a couple of levels of things that are working here to create that experience. So one is the hardware itself, so the headset. The other part is, of course, the software. So on the software side, I mean, one thing that I'm noting this down actually that I want to take a look at is just kind of speak to the rendering team and see what kind of latency they're measuring, because if our latency is high coming out of the software, then there's no way that that's going to be as fluid as possible in the headset. So that's one level that I'm going to interrogate a little bit. But typically, the more impactful things are the hardware. So your headset hardware and then your machine hardware. So I don't know what kind of headset that you're using, but if you have access to more than one headset, that might be an experiment worth doing, because if it's the same kind of dizzy experience between two headsets, then maybe that's pointing us to a software issue or another hardware issue. But if it's only happening on one headset, then okay, we kind of got our answer. But really, the third variable that it could be is your computer hardware. So if your graphics card isn't really that recent and it doesn't have enough power, that's also going to be a source of some latency in an experience like that. So there's those three levels: software, headset hardware, and then computer hardware. So again, with the computer hardware, I would say if you have access to a more powerful machine, worth testing it with the headset that you have and seeing if you can recreate it. And if you do get a chance to do any of that, and if it works or it doesn't work, I would encourage you to go over to our support page on Enscape.com and maybe shoot customer service a message, just so that we can dig into this a little bit more scientifically, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I think Lee has expressed that this problem probably has to do with the headset. But Lee, if you want to explore, you know, better hardware possibilities, give me an email, shoot me an email. I can hook you up. So because we also do customization for hardware solutions here in Novedge. This is the parenthesis. But yeah, thank you for the feedback and for the question, Lee. I think that's it for question, but again, we have a few minutes, so I'm keeping the window box open for the question. In the meantime, if you don't mind, Peter, I'll take the screen back.
Yep.
And I want to show everybody again where they can find Enscape. Go to the novedge.com and search for Enscape. We have the latest release, and of course we also have all the compatible programs that you can use with Enscape. All the BIM solution out there are also here. Now I don't see any other questions, so I'm gonna wrap it up, thanking everybody for attending. And also I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it again on YouTube and Vimeo. And if you want to share with colleagues or your bosses, I'm sure they will come up with a lot of useful information. Thank you so much, Peter, for today's presentation. Looking forward for more. And have a great rest of the day, everybody, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.